maybe I've made a video about this. I feel like I have. I feel like I've at least mentioned it. But I can't find it. So, I'm going to make it again. If it already exists, oh fucking well. So there's this concept in the Western philosophy of mind of a philosophical zombie. And I find this concept fascinating because I don't understand the conclusions that are drawn relative to this concept. None of the conclusions that are drawn by mainstream philosophers whose accounts of it you can actually find make any fucking sense to me. Okay? So, a brief overview. It's Wikipedia. Take that for whatever. Obviously it's not perfect. But it's here, and you can come look at it yourself, and whatever the fuck, and you can go from there. So philosophical zombie, or a P-zombie, just easier to say. So it's this thought experiment in philosophy of mind where you have basically a hypothetical person that doesn't actually have consciousness. Right? But it's supposed to be indecipherable that they don't have this, right? So they will behave as if they do. Okay? So you poke them and they'll move away. You cut them and they will bleed and they will complain about that and say that that's uncomfortable. I find this very shallow analysis of this because even here I don't think it's actually indecipherable whether they have consciousness or not, or qualia or sentience or whatever the fucking fuck. This word sentience is so poorly defined that I'm not even gonna give it any beyond what I'm saying right now. I'm not even gonna mention it because it's just the idea behind it is just too much bullshit. So I'm just gonna talk about conscious experience, right? Okay, so the people it was proposed to be a possible solution to the hard problem of consciousness, which again is a concept that I think is just bullshit. I think is just misapprehended nonsense. So, accounting for subjective or intrinsic first person, what its likeness. Okay. Yeah. I don't think there is a hard problem of consciousness. And I also wouldn't, what I understand it to be attempting to point at, I don't think that's how I would describe it at all. But anyway, okay, so, consciousness, right. So, proponents of the P-zombie arguments, like David Chalmers, say that because a P-zombie is by definition physically identical to a conscious person, even its logical possibility would refute physicalism. No. That's not how logic works, right? As I have mentioned before, and as anyone who is familiar with logic should know, you can have logically valid conclusions that are unsound, that do not correlate with reality. So, something that is logically possible doesn't mean anything. Right? So that's nothing. So David Chalmers is an idiot, okay? And his conclusion is just fucking bullshit. And then there's critics like Dennett, who's a physicalist, say that they are logically incoherent and thus impossible. And again, he's misunderstanding what logic is, right? So the fact that it's impossible doesn't mean it's logically incoherent, and the fact that it's logically incoherent actually doesn't mean that it's impossible. It could just be that the logic you're using can't formulate this because the axioms that you've chosen cannot reach that conclusion, even though it's a possible thing. Like, for instance, Peano arithmetic, using that as an axiom, or anything related to it as an axiomatic foundation for mathematics, You cannot get to the conclusion that mathematical operations fundamentally operate over vectors. But when we look at it objectively, like more objectively, like we actually try to like measure this shit and look at what does math actually operate over, we find that it operates over vectors, right? Division can accept vectors as both arguments and yield a meaningful result, right? Right. It's not taking numbers, it's taking vectors. So the fact that that it's logically coherent within Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory to say that the mathematical operations operate over numbers, that doesn't render it possible. And the fact that in reality these operations operate over vectors doesn't render Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory logically incoherent. They're not related to each other. The possibility and the logical incoherence are not fucking related to each other at all. So Daniel Dennett's an idiot. Alright. And then other physicalists like Chris Hill argue that philosophical zombies are coherent but not metaphysically possible. And that's a little more... I think he has closer to a reasonable understanding of what's happening here. But I also think he's wrong. So, because we know for sure that there are people who are P-zombies, such as someone in a coma. Someone in a coma, they're particular kinds of comas, they're not experiencing anything. There is no conscious experience whatsoever. That doesn't mean they're dead. That doesn't mean that whatever happens, whatever that aspect of them can experience that isn't there. Because they can come out of the coma and now they have it, presumably. So, it's not metaphysically impossible. It's definitely physically possible. So, the idea of the P-zombie isn't doing any of the work that any of these people say it does. Further, if we look at this maybe a little bit more deeply, everyone is a P-zombie with respect to most things. So, like for instance, if you are shown, I don't know what language you speak, I don't know what languages you speak, what writing systems you're familiar with, but so if we show you a writing system that you have never fucking seen before, you're not going to, you're going to probably be like, oh, that's probably language, but you're not going to have any fucking clue where it's from, what it might say, whether it's a warning, whether it's a recipe, whether it's God knows what, right? You don't know anything about that. And you're only going to kind of glance at it. You might even if you find it very, very fascinating, and you just kind of stare at it, you're not going to get very much out of that, right? You have very little conscious awareness of what that means, what's going on there, what's really going on there, right? Like I give you a cuneiform tablet. The odds that anyone in my potential audience here can actually read cuneiform of any variety is pretty fucking small. So it's a pretty solid argument that if I showed you a cuneiform tablet, it's interesting, you'll find it fascinating, but you'll have absolutely no conscious experience of what it says. With respect to that, you are a P-zombie. End. That's the end of that argument. It's just true. So, and this applies to most things, right? So, say you are, you get around however you get around, right? And one day, You get a ride from somebody, or you even acquire the ability to yourself drive yourself around in a white Buick Century from the late 90s. Okay, so you got this, there's this white Buick Century. Suddenly, you become aware of every white Buick Century that you see on the road. And it suddenly you realize that there's a lot of them. They're all over the place. That's this. That's, you went from being a P-zombie with regard to white Buick Centuries to not being a P-zombie with regard to white Buick Centuries. Before this, you had no conscious experience of these things. Yes, you recognize that it's a car. You know, if it's barreling down on you, you're standing in the middle of the road, you're going to move your ass out of the way. But it doesn't matter whether it was a white Buick Century or a green Ford Ranger. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it was a large vehicle that could squash you. But now you have a much more nuanced experience of it. You have the qualia of the experience of what it is has now become profoundly enhanced. And now your conscious experience of this thing is much, much more profound and much, much deeper. So, I would say that really everyone is a P-zombie with respect to virtually everything. Even, say you've lived a very long life and you've familiarized with yourself. You're very highly educated, right? You're very experienced in the world. You've seen all kinds of shit. It's still true that for the most part you're a P-zombie, right? So it's weird to me that they're trying to apply this just across the board to everything. Because it does no work. It does no heavy lifting when you do that. It doesn't even make sense when you try to do that. And that's basically what the argument is, where people are saying, oh, it's impossible, or it's incoherent, or it's, whatever the fuck, right? That's basically what they're doing, because they're looking at it the wrong way. Very much like how solipsism is looked at the wrong way. Philosophers of mind want to deny that they're solipsists because they are not across the board solipsists. And any philosopher who says, no, actually I think solipsism makes sense, and I think maybe I am a solipsist. The fact that they're telling you this, the fact that they're communicating this, that they're having the conversation, means that they absolutely do not have this solipsistic view across the board. They're recognizing that there is somebody there to talk to. Okay? But I think also, as I've noted before in my video about Bertrand Russell being a solipsist, they are recognizing that when you first learn something, your automatic attitude towards it is exceptionally solipsistic. And for most things, your knowledge of it will be exceptionally shallow. So overall, you are going to be very solipsistic in general, because most shit you don't know about. Most shit you're going to be solipsistic about. That is a reasonable approach. And here, it's the same sort of thing here. You're a P-zombie conditionally, topic by topic, right? The degree to which you're a P-zombie with respect to something is related to your awareness of it, your knowledge of it, right? So, ironically, when you are most solipsistic about something is also when you are most like a P-zombie with respect to that thing. Like, you know basically nothing about it, so you think that you're the only one that knows anything about it. You have virtually no experience of it, and thus you think you're the only one that has any experience of it at all. This, I think, is inescapable, and it's amazing to me that nobody is saying this. Like, what the fuck are you guys doing? Who's paying you to understand these things? And as such, I don't think it touches on the quote-unquote hard problem of consciousness at all, because it can't. It's it's not, because it's not something that applies as a blanket argument over how the mind works at all. It can't do that sort of lifting. It can't do that sort of work. It's not possible for this to really address the hard problem of consciousness in any way whatsoever. What the fuck are you doing?